Welcome to the Superhero Leadership Podcast, hosted by former CEO of Marvel Entertainment, Peter Cuneo. Listen as he explores outstanding leadership through the lens of successful superhero leaders. Here's your host, Peter Cuneo.
My guest today is Colonel Jack Jacobs, a true American hero and a man of extraordinary accomplishments across military, academic, financial, and media landscapes. Born in Brooklyn, New York, Colonel Jacobs earned both his bachelor's and master's degrees from Rutgers before entering the U.S. Army through ROTC in 1966. Over a distinguished military career, he served in Vietnam twice as an advisor to Vietnamese infantry battalions, earning 2 Purple Hearts, 3 Bronze Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Silver Stars, and the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest combat decoration. After retiring as a colonel in 1987, he transitioned seamlessly into business, becoming a pioneer developing new ways of packaging and selling debt, managing billions in hedge funds, and later investing in global real estate. A published author, a dedicated educator, and a trusted voice on national security and leadership, Colonel Jacobs brings a wealth of perspective that spans the battlefield to the boardroom. It's a great honor to welcome him to our show. I'm going to read your citation, or an excerpt from your citation for the Medal of Honor. And it's something I just wrote up, but it'll be pretty close to reality. Although wounded by mortar fragments to the head and arms, Jack Jacobs took command of the company and ordered withdrawal to a more secure position. Jack was advising a unit of the South Vietnamese army, and the commander of that army had been injured and wounded, and so Jack had to basically take command. Despite having impaired vision caused by his injuries, he repeatedly ran across open rice paddies through heavy fire to evacuate wounded, personally saving a fellow advisor and the wounded company advisor and 12 other soldiers. 3 times during these trips, he encountered Viet Cong squads, which he simply handled and dispersed. He was subsequently promoted to captain and awarded the Medal of Honor. And for us mortals, Jack, we can't imagine running across open rice fields under fire from numerous enemy positions. What was it like? What do you remember?
Well, the first thing to remember is that everybody who's in combat is just like everybody else. And whatever extraordinary kinds of things take place on the battlefield or aboard a ship or in the air, those things are accomplished by ordinary people who find themselves in a difficult situation and are sort of overtaken by the perception that they may be the only person who can do anything. We walked into a huge ambush, and we had a very large number of troops who were killed and wounded in the initial seconds of the ambush. The enemy let us get within about 50 meters of their prepared positions. And all of a sudden, you realize that it's a genuine crisis. And people misuse the term crisis all the time. I used to work for a guy who said everything was a crisis. Well, if everything's a crisis, then nothing's a crisis. But if you're at the bottom of the food chain in combat and people are ardently trying to kill you, that's when it's a crisis. Something has to be done right now. And if it isn't done right now, it's all going down the drain. And I think that if you talk to anybody who's been in a difficult situation like that, whether he was cited for it or not, he'll tell you that he perceived that he may be the only person who can actually accomplish anything. I'm reminded of the observation of the 1st century Hebrew scholar Hillel, who said, "If not you, who? And if not now, when?" And I think people who accomplish things in difficult situations, whether it's on the battlefield or in business or any other, in politics or any other milieu, do so because they perceive they may be the only person who can make a difference. And I think that's what motivates. The other thing that motivates you, of course, is that you're among your buddies. And if the situation were reversed and you were in dire straits and they were capable of taking care of you, they do it. You have to rely on one another, and you always do. You do that on the ground, in the air, aboard ship. You're all in. Who was it? It was Franklin who wrote before the Revolution, "We either hang together or we will surely hang separately." He was right then, and he would still be right today, Peter.
I often talk about my time on the ship. There's a guided missile destroyer. The guns had a range of 11 miles, so we could shoot into North Vietnam, into South Vietnam. We had nuclear-tipped depth charges. There was no danger from submarines, though. And we had 300 sailors and 20 officers. And we would go to sea typically for 30 days. And then we would go to a port somewhere in the Western Pacific for maybe 3, 4, 5 days, and then go back again into the war. And I think if you haven't been in the military, particularly in a combat situation, it's hard for some people to understand the bond that you develop for the people you're with. They are depending on you for survival, and you are depending on them for survival.
Yeah, you're all in it together.
You're all in it together. And on a Navy ship, generally speaking, it has to be a team effort. There's no way to survive because there's too many moving parts. And so I often have told my friends, that if I walking down the street and I see someone from the ship, and I've been gone from the ship over 50 years, we are brothers instantly. I'll be back in a moment with more of Superhero Leadership. Stay with us. Jack, you went back. You went back 3 or 4 years later. Why did you go back?
Well, I ought to start off by saying that I was originally going to come in the Army and serve my 3 years, which was my obligation, and get out. I just wanted to do my bit and then go to law school or something like that. And I stayed because I really loved the people, and I didn't want to, I missed them, and I didn't want to leave them. And today when people ask me, what do I miss most about the Army? I mean, I went to the Army almost 60 years ago. It's the people, and I always feel better when I'm around people in uniform or people who have served in uniform. So I stayed. But the reason I went back to Vietnam was a little bit more prosaic than that. The Army had sent me to graduate school after going to the infantry officers advanced course. And I got out in 70, and then went to graduate school from 70 to 72. And my utilization assignment after graduate school was to go teach at West Point. So I called up my officer assignment guy and said, okay, I'm ready to go to West Point. He said, they don't want you now until 73. What am I going to do for a year? Well, you're going on a short tour, which means a 1-year tour unaccompanied by family. I had a wife and 2 kids. I said, well, where is that? They said, Korea. Korea? I don't want to go to Korea. It's too cold. I mean, in retrospect, it's warmer than New Jersey in Korea, but in any case, I didn't want to go. They said, we argued left and right, and I said, I want to go back to Vietnam. You can't go back. You're not allowed to go back to Vietnam because you're a Medal of Honor recipient, and we don't want Medal of Honor recipients to get killed and captured and all that stuff. But I had in the back of my mind the notion that if I went to Vietnam, I'd get $1 a day family separation allowance plus $65 a month combat pay. I mean, do the math. That's almost, it's more than $25 a week more than I was making. I think I was making $300 a month at the time as a captain in the Army. We argued back and forth, and in the end, he said, all right, we're going to let you go, but you're going to get an assignment on a desk at the Military Assistance Command headquarters in Vietnam, so no combat for you. You're getting a desk job. You bet. I got there to Camp Alpha, picked up the phone, I called the Airborne Advisory Team, and got Sergeant First Class Rick Biondo from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, or someplace somewhere. I said, let me talk to the senior advisor, who was a colonel. Not here. Deputy, not here. Admin officer, not here. I said, where is everybody? They're all the way up north where you were fighting, Peter. You're all the way up north, taking back Quang Tri province after the Easter offensive. He said, what do you want, by the way? I said, well, I want to come to the team. By the way, if you're in an airborne slot, not only do you get that extra $25 a week, but you get paid $110 a month. What is that, another $26 a week?
Oh.
Airborne pay. I'd be rolling in it, which wasn't even a lot of money back in those days. Nevertheless, he says, well, I tell you what, and you can't get away with this now because, they got a picture of your retina and they know exactly who you are and where you are. He said, give me your name, rank, and service number. He says, I've got a friend in orders section. I'll just have your orders changed. In 2 hours, I'll be there to Camp Alpha to pick you up. And he got my orders changed, collected me at Camp Alpha. We went to Tan Son Nhut Air Base, got on a C-123 piloted by Vietnamese pilots and flew up to Hue Phu Bai Airport. And I was on my way to being senior advisor of the 1st Airborne Battalion. And the Army did not know anything at all about this. And when they did find out about it, they were mightily discomfited. They were not very happy about it. By then it was too late.
Right. You asked for forgiveness, right?
Asked for forgiveness and not permission.
That's right. Yeah. Jack, one of the themes we do have here that we see both with our guests and also when we look at some very famous individuals historically, we see that there's some very interesting things about how they were raised, how they grew up, starting from a very young age. That this was somehow a predictor or certainly led them to think about or planted seeds about leadership, a life of leadership. Did you ever think about your growing up and maybe, this particular experience I had was interesting to me and I, led to thinking about leadership? Or was it just an adventure like I grew up, we both grew up in the melting pot of New York City.
Right.
So very diverse.
Yeah.
So I always credit that for some of my whatever skills I have in leadership, just because I had to deal with people all the way through high school, very diverse group. My high school, there were 4,000 students.
Mine too.
Okay, 1,000 in my graduating class, but we all got along. As I said, there was a mixed group completely. And but I started to learn, looking back now, I was learning the instincts. Leadership is learning instincts, Jack. I don't believe there's such a thing as he or she is a born leader. I think we learn leadership and the instincts, the behaviors, the philosophies, the emotional reactions of leadership through our experiences in life.
Well, I think it's an art, it's an art that can be learned.
Yeah,
I agree
and it's all based primarily on face-to-face interactions with other human beings.
Yeah, that's why I think we're making a big mistake not being face-to-face all the time, because that's how you pick up cues by talking to people, and if you're at some remote distance, and you have no human interaction, it's very difficult otherwise.
Well, our way we grew up, everything was face-to-face. We'll continue our conversation with Colonel Jacobs right after this short break. We're very concerned on this podcast about young people not learning leadership because in the end, we have maybe less good leadership in the world than ever. Just turn on the TV. I'm not talking about just the U.S. I'm talking about anywhere. There's all sorts of problems in this world, and we're going to need the young people to lead us in the future. And I always define young, in my case, as 30 and under.
I think young is I thought 70 and younger, but there you go.
Well, maybe I have to redo my thinking on that. And so we talk about why, and it's partly that lack of face-to-face experiences. The phone is, in a sense, the enemy of leadership, but we all depend on it. of any age. But families just don't sit down at the dinner table together and talk.
Well, I
very
think
often.
that's the point. You and I grew up in an environment in which we were taught, and I think this is an independent variable, if not the most important independent variable. We were taught from a very early age to be responsible for everything we did or failed to do.
I think the young people today, one of the problems is they don't learn their strengths and their weaknesses. This is how human beings survive, basically. We make it complicated, but we are happy if we learn our strengths and weaknesses. With our weaknesses, we avoid or we get bad work to get better, whatever suits us in a particular situation. But we have a pretty good idea of ourselves, I think, and so on. But unfortunately, young people today, they're really not allowed to learn strengths.
I think even grown-up people don't. I tell people all the time, in business in particular, but it's also true everywhere, always surround yourself with people who are smart. If you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in big trouble. You have to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, because if you do otherwise, you're going to wind up with a coterie of yes men who are going to agree with everything that you say. And, you know, nobody's smart enough to get it right all the time. You have to, but we don't do that often. We like to be comfortable. The younger generation in particular likes to be comfortable and doesn't want to be told that they have spinach between their teeth or that they don't know what they're talking about and they're all wrong. The only way we're going to get it right is if you have a bunch of people telling you you're wrong when you're wrong.
I've been doing speeches around the world on leadership for 20 plus years, and I have a list of things that I recommend for young people today to learn leadership. You wouldn't be surprised by the list, Jack. It's about 50, but most of them are all about interfacing with other human beings. And I think that there's a couple that I used to get a reaction from the audience. It was like, I could read the audience, 200 people shaking their head, no, you're crazy, Cuneo, when you say this. But today, not so much. But one of them is let your kids fail. And I know that, look, no parent wants to see their kids fail or unhappy. I get that. But it's really part of growing up and surviving in the world.
Well, that's how you learn.
We all agree that we learn much more from our failures than our successes.
All true.
Jack, I've had a few successes in my life. I barely can remember any details, really. But my failures, I remember every gory aspect
very instructive,
of them. Yeah,
I'm not doing that
absolutely.
again.
Yeah. I think it just requires you to be honest with yourself, though. Unfortunately, some human beings just can't get over the hump to be honest with themselves about failure. It wasn't someone else's fault. It wasn't this thing we call bad luck. You did it. You blew it.
Yeah, if you're a victim all the time, you learn nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's very important. I'd like to talk a little bit about, of course, your life after the military. You were an instructor at West Point near the end of your career in the Army, but you've written several books. You were in investment banking for a while. You worked for some big name companies. You're now an analyst, military analyst for the NBC group of stations and so on. And how do you ever think back about what you are today, and how those days going way back affected you and helped you in later life?
I think one of the principal reasons I was successful after I got out of the Army was because I had been in the Army. I think all the time about my father's service in the Army during the Second World War. He had been studying electrical engineering at University of Minnesota when he was dragooned into the Army, something like 8 weeks from graduation. Hated the Army, hated getting dragged out of school, hated getting shot at. Nobody likes that. Got out of the Army the instant that he could when the war was over. When he got to be my age, all he would talk about was how proud he was at having saved the world. But he was a little bit older. He was a sergeant and was in the Battle of Manila. And he was 26 years old. All of his troops called him the old man because they were 18, 19 years old. And I reflect on that and realized early on that nothing gives you more authority and responsibility at an early age than being in uniform. I mean, you and I we were 20, 21 years old and responsible for everything in the lives of, 10, 20, 30, 40 people. You don't get that anywhere except in the military establishment. Years later, when I was at a cocktail party and a guy had been a Marine A4 pilot for about 8 years and then went to back to the family business on Wall Street, came up to me and said, you know what you need to do? Retire from the Army, come to work for me, and I'll pay you a lot of money to learn the bond business. And my wife asked me, she said, what's the bond business? I said, I have absolutely no idea, but I'm 42 years old making $40,000 a year. I think I'm going to retire. And then you would think that there'd be this enormous finite gap discontinuity between being in uniform, being a colonel in the Army on the one hand, and being on Wall Street on the other. And that's absolutely positively not true. Anybody who's been in uniform can do anything not in uniform because you've already had so much authority and responsibility. And by the way, nobody's shooting at you either. I had not taken an economics course before I got out of the Army and went into the bond business. But it's if you've been in uniform, you can learn anything and you can learn it in absolutely no time whatsoever. That's true not just for me, but for anybody who's been in uniform. Picking up new stuff after you've been responsible for everything in the lives of a bunch of people, piece of cake.
Yeah, I certainly have that feeling too. I think I credit my time in the Navy. I was about 3.5 years in total, but I credit my time and the leadership I learned from other officers senior to me, senior enlisted men, some of whom reported to me.
It's a lifetime of
just
experience.
Seeing them in action.
A lifetime of leadership experience in 3.5 years.
Yeah.
You can't buy that.
Yeah. And I think also the Navy would staff, I certainly with the officers for sure, would staff these ships with their best. And I still revere, almost like a child, some of the captains that I had and other people that I served with. Just were incredible to me. And so, yeah, and I think that I actually, part of my career has been doing turnarounds. I've done 7 successful turnarounds of companies that were
I think you're the master of turnarounds, to be honest with you.
Well, I did 3 in Europe too, and which is even more complicated because of cultural differences. But I think I was actually thrown into the first turnaround. I didn't think of myself at the time. I was a classic big corporate financial guy. I didn't think of myself as having any particular skills, and so on. But my boss showed up one day and said, we're going to Europe and you're going to take over the overseas operation, stay in New York, commute, and so on. And I was really off emotionally for about 6 months. And then we started getting results. And when I thought about it, I realized I was just being me. But it was the stuff that I had learned from other people. In the end, my leadership was largely a reflection of what I had learned or experienced from other people. And what worked and what didn't work.
And I think you said something really important, and integrating that into being yourself. I get, and a lot of people who've been in leadership positions get asked all the time by young people, can you give me one bit of advice? And other than being technically and tactically proficient and all the rest of that, I mean, you got to know your craft. Mm-hmm. The most important thing is something that I got from reading, of all people, Oscar Wilde, who once wrote, when he was asked the same thing, give me one bit of leadership advice, he wrote, be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. You can pick up techniques from other leaders you admire. And you can pick up bits and pieces but you've got to integrate it into your own personality. You can try to be like somebody else, but if you try to be somebody else, even the dumbest guy in your organization is going to be able to look right through you and see that you're a fake. You got to be you. You got to be good, but you got to be you. Otherwise, people won't follow you, and they'll perceive that you're faking it.
We'll continue our conversation with Colonel Jacobs right after this short break. I often get asked about, a career in turnarounds. Turnarounds are not for everybody. It takes a certain, I think, attitude about it. In fact, I've always liked to say I'm the weirdo, because most human beings wouldn't want to do what I did or have done with turnarounds, because it's stressful.
Well, it's all
and
uphill.
You're going to make,
it's all uphill.
Going to make a lot of people unhappy, because you're going to make radical change, and human beings, even when there's good change, get upset.
Mm.
And so you have to be prepared to be unpopular, maybe even permanently. And so something's wrong with me, because I've managed to be prepared. But I was thrown into the first one, and I think it has to do, again, to my time in the war. Big problems, but doing turnarounds, no one was going to die. I mean, I often would have that thought when things weren't looking so good, or because most of the turnarounds, the first 6 months, I was convinced I had made a career blunder. And then things started to go right, and they all worked out. But I think that my time in the Navy actually prepared me for that kind of career. Even though I was thrown into it, I had no idea I would be good at it. Today, you're on TV quite often. You have a TV studio in your house, as you've mentioned to me. I'm just curious about that life. How much lead time do they give you before you have to make an appearance?
It depends. Occasionally they'll call up and say, "What are you doing on such and such a date?" Or usually, "What are you doing tomorrow at this time? Because we want to talk about X." But frequently, and particularly when there's breaking news, and particularly during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, I get a phone call asking, "Where are you?" Which is one reason why they put a studio in my house. Among other things, I didn't have to come to New York. It saved them a great deal of money in car fare, and they'd already depreciated the equipment anyway. But I'll often get a call asking me where I am and can you hop on. Now you can do Zoom or some other kind of thing. You can do it on your phone, and you didn't have the capability before. So sometimes I'll get absolutely no warning whatsoever.
Okay.
Which is fine with me. I like to not think about things too much and for too long, because among other things, between the time they say, "We're going to talk about X," and the time you get on the air, the situation's changed dramatically. And so whatever you're playing, it's like being aboard a ship or on the ground in combat. It's going to change minute by minute.
Yeah.
But I enjoy the heck out of it. It's in an environment in which people get a great deal of information which is not checked out, which may or may not be correct. You feel as if you're performing some kind of public service by disappraising people of the rubbish that they've heard elsewhere.
Right. Well, there's no question there's an awful lot of misinformation out there in the world, and in all media forms. It's sad, and this gets back to young people. They're not able to see through what they're hearing because they haven't had the experiences that they need to make a judgment, and it's pretty sad.
And one of the things you learn is to question. I mean, we learned from when we were very young and when we went to school. You got to know your stuff, but also ask why and whether or not it makes a great deal of sense. But people don't do that as frequently today as they should. They accept, without any evidence, stuff that they've heard that's complete nonsense in many cases.
Well, Jack, we're getting near to the end of our time together today, but I want to go back to when we first started, and I asked you, what was it like when you were running through the rice paddies? And I wanted to tell you what I'd heard from other holders of the Medal of Honor as well. So what they told me, essentially almost the same words, was I was just doing what I was trained to do. I didn't really even think about it so much. And I wasn't really afraid, because if I was afraid, I couldn't have done it. And but they say this with the greatest of humility, Jack. And they often insist that anyone could have done what they did, which I don't believe personally. But, is that sound ring a bell with you?
No, I think it's correct. I think anybody could do it if he would.
Yeah.
The question of fear is kind of an interesting one. It's hard to distinguish between being afraid and not being afraid in a situation in which people are ardently trying to kill you, and you have become convinced that you're probably not going to make it through for the next couple of hours, let alone the rest of the day. But it's the interesting thing about fear in a combat situation, I've discovered, is not that it's a paralyzing variable. It actually galvanizes you to do things which you're supposed to do, you should do, you've learned to do in training time and time again. And the fear itself actually gets you moving. I mean, you're in a crappy situation. You say, if we sit here, we're all going to die. Yeah. We can't do that.
Yeah.
Better get moving. And I think it galvanizes you to action, whereas it's intuitively obvious to the casual observer who's not been in the combat situation, not been in the crucible of combat, that it would paralyze you and just lie there. But that's not the case at all. Every recipient you talk to, whether it's of the Medal of Honor or any other valorous award, will tell you the same thing, that there were many valorous people that day. They saw it every day, and it's because they were motivated by the situation to do what they had to do, what they were trained to do, what they knew they had to do. Otherwise, the situation would be much worse. It's that your training and the love of your comrades which get you moving.
I understand. Just final question. The National Medal of Honor Museum is opened recently in Arlington, Texas, and I know that you are one of the you're the chairman or the co-chairman.
Well, I'm on the board.
Okay, and I would like to recommend, and I'm sure you'll endorse this, that everybody that's listening or watching us today should go there and go through.
It's spectacular.
It is. I'm sure it is. I'm gonna make the trip at some point. I often say to people that all Americans, should visit these sites where, overseas or in the United States, that honor our veterans and honor our military. It's all so much a part of our history.
Yeah, it's a magnificent edifice with tremendous displays, and less about the heroics than it is about the stories of ordinary people and the values that we've been talking about that drove them to do the kinds of things that they did, remembering that they were not alone in doing it. There was a Medal of Honor recipient who was for a long time the oldest recipient, Woody Williams, who earned his medal on Iwo Jima as a young kid, 17 years old, who frequently would touch his medal and say, "This is not mine, I just hold it in trust." And another recipient, Nikki Bacon from Vietnam, now gone, who said that I don't, this is not for me. I wear this for all those who can't. Remember all the people who performed valiantly and never came home. And this museum is all about that, all about what we've been talking about today. It's a great place to bring kids to learn the kinds of things we've been discussing today.
Yeah. Well, Jack, it's been great. I really appreciate you coming by.
No, my honor to be with you. Thanks for asking me.
Well, I appreciate it. I hope that our listeners and viewers have a greater appreciation for the value of the military, in particular in leadership and learning leadership. Maybe you want to send your kids or your grandkids. I certainly would recommend it. I'm just super happy we could get together, Jack.
So am I. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
You bet.
Bye. That's it for this episode of Superhero Leadership. A big thank you to my friend Jack Jacobs. for sharing his remarkable insights and experiences. I hope you'll join me again next time. Until then, stay focused, stay driven, and keep leading life as a superhero with purpose, passion, and integrity. I'm Peter Cuneo.